Now we've entered Lockdown 2, the unwanted sequel, it's safe to say that the whole world is tired of hearing about the C word. This time around, rather than turning on the trusty webcam and banging a pan in the street, some people are trying to get the whole thing to stop. The wackiest might be the employment of an 800-year-old document to justify why lockdown rules don't apply to them. According to Article 61 of the Magna Carta, people can lawfully rebel against injustices proposed by the government, and so businesses can't be forced to close during lockdown. There are other things on the internet that point out why you can't just lift a clause from a document written in medieval Latin and apply it to today, but I would say the most incriminating evidence is this. Article 61 was included in the first version of the Magna Carta that King John was forced to sign in 1215. This was the version that he promptly got the Pope to announce null and void. Notwithstanding this setback, the English nobles wrote up a shiny new Carta in 1217, but this version did not include Article 61. In fact, there were multiple versions of the Magna Carta written over the 12th century before it became statute law in 1297, but only the first one contained the beloved Article 61. This makes it a flimsy piece of evidence to cite when you want to carry on doing what you want, because Article 61 was barely in the Magna Carta in the first place. This isn't the first time someone has whacked out the Magna Carta in response to political situations they don't like. There is a popular myth that Article 61 allows for lawful dissent and rebellion, and this has been applied to other contexts before, despite the fact that there is more up-to-date systems that allow you to express your opinions and concerns. What is it about this musty medieval document that means it is still considered a point of legitimacy and moral high ground? Why is it the defining document of the Middle Ages that we all know about? And why is it that there are some people who want to make sure its clauses are upheld? You might have heard the story. King John was a terrible king who oppressed his people with weak leadership and an obsession with money. Under him, everyone was poor and hungry, and they had no voice under feudal society. That was until the barons put their heads together and laid out a set of new rules that restricted the king's power, gave the people more freedom, and scrapped the feudal system. They made King John sign the document, and since then everyone in the Western world has been enjoying a time of happiness, freedom, and ultimately, democracy. This interpretation of the Magna Carta has literally marked the landscape over here in Runnymede, where the original document was signed. Here you can come and visit this sculpture representing the barons and their pivotal demands. Each of these chairs represents a different point in the journey towards democracy, in which the Magna Carta evidently played a momentous role. Most importantly, you can see this monument commissioned by the American Bar Association, which commemorates the signing of the Magna Carta. You could say they're quite grateful to those 12th century barons because some parts of the US Constitution were taken from rough translations of Magna Carta. The ideas the Magna Carta proposed were a huge inspiration, and these ideas were apparently very ahead of their time. The Magna Carta, a symbol of freedom under law. Why wouldn't the US pay for a monument to it in a random field in another country? After President Kennedy's assassination, the UK government offered the US a bit of land to build a memorial for him. Well, what better place for his memorial than the literal field of democracy itself? Let's take a look at the rest of the clauses to truly bask in the freedom in our allegiance to democracy. London shall have all its liberties and free customs. That sounds good. No widow shall be compelled to marry. Yes, we wouldn't want any of that. To no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right or justice. We love to see it. No town or person shall be forced to build bridges over rivers except those with an ancient obligation to do so. Quite specific, but okay. All fish weirs shall be removed from the Thames, the Medway, and throughout the whole of England except on the sea coast. Well, I don't think that happened. Moving on. No scutage or aid may be levied in our kingdom without its general consent unless it is for the ransom of our person to pay the eldest. What does that all mean? So if you read the original manuscript a bit more carefully, it turns out that it's full of archaic vocabulary and circumstances that are completely irrelevant to the modern world. One clause demands that the barons and royal officials can't take wood for their castles without asking first. I'm not sure how much of a widespread problem we have with log-stealing castle owners, but I suspect it is less than when we relied on actual fires to cook food and to not freeze to death. This is just one example that shows the barons drew up demands that closely related to their current society. It's difficult to apply it to the modern world when it just isn't applicable. But you say, we know it isn't all relevant today, we're not stupid, we know it was written a long time ago, we're not seriously saying every word should be followed. It's the ideas that matter, not the weirdly specific stuff about bridges and whatever. What about all the important clauses, the ones about justice and judgment? Yeah, that's it. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned except by the lawful judgment of his equals by the law of the land. And then, to no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right or justice. Forget the other random ones, that's what the Magna Carta is about. But is it though? When the Baron said, "We have granted to all free men of our kingdom, for ourselves and for our heirs forever, all the liberties written below," what did they mean by free men, and what did they mean by liberties? The Magna Carta is written in Latin. Not just any Latin, but medieval Latin. Once you've learned how to understand that, you also need to be able to read this handwriting. Even when you've done that, it's inevitable that you'll have an imperfect translation. The translation might not be fully representative of the original meaning, and it is easy to project modern meanings onto the document. In our society, free men is a broad term that applies to everyone. It also has connotations and connections with more recent history. However, when the barons wrote about free men, they were talking about landowners, or about people who held land in exchange for military service. Not quite the same thing. Fine, you say. We get that they weren't talking about everyone. It was the Middle Ages. But we have to start somewhere. It was the start of liberties and freedom for everyone. But what did they mean by liberty? Was it the same concept that Thomas Jefferson was writing about? Was it the same thing as what they shouted on the streets of the French Revolution? There are a few key terms that pop up throughout the Carta. The barons really wanted to avoid something called scutages and aids. These were part of what was called feudal dues, or fees that barons had to pay the king whenever he had a particular need. When the barons wanted to do things like marry again, or claim an inheritance, or avoid military service, they had to cough up to the king. No, the Magna Carta was a document written up so the barons could avoid paying taxes. It's very expensive being a king. You need to raise money for essential services to the people, like fighting the French. One way to do this is to collect feudal dues from your wealthy nobles. King John needed lots of money to finance the war against France. Unfortunately for him, the war hadn't been going well at all, and he was running out of money. But luckily for him, King Henry and King Richard had set a precedent for claiming high feudal dues. King Henry had even carried out a survey of the tenants-in-chief to find out how many feudal dues he was owed and to work out how to systematically exploit his barons for money. And that meant as long as the king had a steady stream of money from the barons, war was sorted. That was until King John lost Anjou and Normandy in 1204 and a lot of money went with it. So he introduced a new type of direct taxation which was to be paid by everyone. But just as John had finished stockpiling money in various castles, an increasing abundance of silver rendered his money worthless. It was time to return to the old ways of claiming feudal dues, which King John wrapped up in order to finance the still ongoing war. When a widow wanted to remarry, he made her cough up £3,000, an extortionate sum, so she could get out of the king's marital agreement and marry who she wanted. He also came up with some more sneaky ways to extort the people for money. He made himself the supreme judge and he accepted money payments in exchange for smoothing the course of justice or making a favourable verdict. In 1215 he accepted 300 cows, 300 bulls and 120 horses for clearing up a lawsuit about a barony. Under his new financial regime, everything was looking good for John, until the barons got fed up with it. They were being asked to pay fees for all kinds of things. All they were trying to do was inherit their lands and riches, and yet they had to pay King John a relief for the privilege to do so. Outrageous. And so it was time to gather in a field and stop this leak in their privileges. When the Magna Carta talks about scutages and aids, what it means is that the barons were trying to evade their taxes. And yes, feudal dues had massively increased under John, but in the grand scheme of things, the barons were not the ones who should have been complaining about wealth distribution at that time. You don't hear much about this at the Magna Carta Memorial. You can read about how the Magna Carta led to the formation of democracy and set a precedent for the fight against tyranny. Apparently the Magna Carta even entered the feudal system, which is quite impressive considering that 90% of the people who worked under the feudal system are never mentioned in the manuscript. So why has this musty document become such a source of admiration and myth? It was the first time the barons had banded together against the monarch's tyranny, even if it was the tyranny of taxation. It seems that was inspiration enough to bring us along on the Mayflower in 1620. If you ask an 18th century historian, they might tell you about how the Magna Carta was the first step from going from this to this, and that it was a crucial part of developing the thoughts and writings that made that happen. However, if you find a medievalist instead, they might have something else to say. Most of it is completely irrelevant, and besides, it took years for the Carta to have any kind of effect. It entered the feudal system? More like, did the feudal system exist in the first place? That clause about lawful descent, that wasn't even a thing. Maybe the Magna Carta's main success was that it was able to limit the amount of money that the king could raise for arbitrary reasons, which is more specific than the memorial would let on. The turning point might be more in the 16th century when people started viewing and using the Carta as something that limits arbitrary uses of power. For example, when King Charles I tried to stop the proceedings of his trial, the Magna Carta was brought up because it was considered that Charles was delaying justice. The key word might be symbol. It's not literally the founding document of democracy, but something that holds a fondness in many people's hearts as a place where it all started. To some it is a symbol of freedom under law, bringing us into the modern world. To others it might just be a tool of baronial privilege. That doesn't stop myths and misconceptions popping up. I hope I've shed a light on some of the more strange and surprising aspects of the Magna Carta, because you certainly wouldn't know about it just by going to this memorial. When you are reading an old translated document, it is easy to project modern views and concepts onto it. When you learn more about what happened around the time it was written and what the words it uses specifically refer to, it's clear there is a lot more going on in this strange handwriting. It is not making bold proclamations about freedom and liberty as we understand it today. It is making specific demands because the barons had got fed up with being asked to constantly pay feudal dues. And so next time you buy your tickets to Egham Station to see this wonderful and charming Magna Carta statue situated outside Tesco, spare a thought to those poor barons who had to pay the king before inheriting their vast wealth. This is a manuscript that has been used in different ways over time, and so we can think about it in different ways too. But it has also attracted more myths and misconceptions than maybe any other manuscript of its time. Because no, Barbara, it's a global crisis, and you can't get out of the rules by plucking out an 800-year-old manuscript.